So today I'm going to be drawing Vespertine for Margaret Rogerson's self-titled Vespertine. It is such an interesting book. I actually posted a review over on my book channel, but I had a different idea of what Vespertine would look like based on the descriptions in the story, and so I just wanted to try my hand at bringing to life what I thought they would look like versus the cover art. In the story, Vespertine is a kind of orphaned, without any spoilers, she's basically an orphan living in a convent, not by choice, of course, and is plagued sort of by a supernatural power that I really won't go into detail about, but needless to say, she has a revenant kind of lurking in her company, as well as this white raven that she calls Trouble, which is just kind of a cute little play on Here Comes Trouble. But the cover really gives her like a pretty visage, and that is not the vibe that I got when reading the book. When I was reading the book, I was getting disgruntled gremlin, like absolute goblin vibes, which I really liked. And I liked the fact that there was a not like other girls vibe, but not in the pick me girl vibe, but in the I might eat trash out of a trash can vibe. I mean, she's not like other girls. But it was in a good way. And so, I don't know, I really enjoyed the character and just wanted to see if I could bring my image to life of what I thought they looked like. I did take a little bit of liberties with what she was wearing, just because I was not going to go the extra mile and actually look up accurate clothing for the time-inspired pieces, which I feel like it's very much a middle-age sort of book, but Margaret Rogerson's books are typically more vibes than they are like historical plots. Obviously, there are revenants in this, which are sort of like demons and otherworldly things, and so I didn't feel the need to go hardcore into stylistic choices or anything based on, period pieces, nothing like that. I will say that if you haven't read this book and you enjoy a nice goblin heroine, please go read this book. It's probably not the peak of literary work, but it's definitely a peak YA fantasy. Now, I don't know what it was really marketed as. I assume YA because that's kind of her realm, but it really read like a new adult. They had a lot of conversations that felt new adult. Her attitude felt very new adult. And it was really nice. And I think that there needs to be more of this type of new adult because there just isn't enough trash can children out there. And that's just like the only way that I can describe this character, because they just do not care what people think of them. They are all about throwing people off. About the art, though, I'm just drawing in Procreate. It's been a while since I have drawn anything due to my teaching job. So good luck to me, I guess, in this project. It took me a long time to get certain things that really took better motor skills than I have and more practice, like drawing hands, for instance. I cut out a lot of footage of me just struggling over hands and trying to get angles correct, and I pretty much never use a liquify tool, and that's not to be like a brag. It's mostly because I don't really understand it, but I did try to use the warp mesh tool on this because I was struggling with some of the facial features, I tried to use it to give myself an idea of how the hand should work in certain poses, which I ended up doing a totally different pose by the end of it. My intention when I first started was I'll have the raven kind of on her shoulder and she'll be like petting its kind of beak area, and she'll have another hand holding her relic. The revenants all have relics that they're attached to, and it's kind of like a little necklace, amulet type thing. And they also have these necklaces that like burn incense and they kind of fight with them. It's kind of cool. It reminded me a little bit of how The Witcher uses signs. But by the end of it, I kind of decided that it really didn't work for me, mostly because it wasn't looking good in the composition. And so I decided to forgo it because I thought the raven and the revenant in the background were doing enough for the piece that I didn't really need another element, especially one that wasn't going so well. I think I'll pause here and let you guys see a little bit more of the painting style. Oh, that's a lie. I'm not going to pause. I'm just going to keep talking. The painting style was fun. So I knew I wanted this to be kind of a monochromatic-ish neutral. I did bring in a little bit of pink, almost like a faded neutral blush tone eventually. But at first, I just wanted to go for a totally gray and black and white image. Gosh, I hope you guys can't hear my computer dying in the background. It's making a terrible noise on the fan. But anyway, I decided about halfway through, this was about a 3-hour painting, that I didn't want it to be completely uncolored. Now, I did try to include her scars from the story. She has severe burns on her hands. But at one point, I changed the hand placement and you couldn't really see the scarring, and so I decided to actually just go ahead and change it into gloves, which she wears throughout most of the story to hide her very noticeable burns, which is also part of the lore in the story where they want to capture her for a reason I will not go into, and her hands are very recognizable due to these scars that she has got through various tribulations. It's so hard not to spoil you guys. It's so worth reading, though. I was kind of happy that Margaret Rogerson stepped away from fairies and fae stories. I'm not a huge fan of those. I didn't grow up on those. I grew up on wizards and vampires and werewolves, and so I don't necessarily love her like explorations into fae, like an Enchantment of Ravens. I mean, I did love it. Like, I did enjoy the story, but it's not like my favorite. I really like when she explores demons. I just find that really interesting. Like, her story that I initially found her through was Sorcery of Thorns, and I loved it. I adored it. It kind of has magic and demons, and this one is similar. I will say it's a lot of vibes, and the plot suffers for that because she does magnificent world building. I wanted so much more lore. I wanted backgrounds on characters. I wanted 200 more pages in that book. But unfortunately, part of, soft world building is that you don't often get everything you want out of it. And so I do hope that, like Sorcery of Thorns, we'll get a novella or something to add to the world, because there are some other characters that I would just really enjoy seeing and knowing more of and getting some background. There's a character in the story who's mentioned briefly in the epilogue that, most of the time you are assuming something terrible has happened to them due to someone else in the story, and then you find out that they did it themselves. And so you don't ever know. You don't know why. You don't understand their reasons. And so we really, I feel like, need a novella for that, because there are characters that you want to know more about and you want to really dig into their stories. So I really hope one day that Margaret Rogerson will delve into larger novels, like larger fantasy novels. I am thinking of, the 600 pages that we see in other stories. Now, I do think that's why she is so fun to read, is that she doesn't bog you down with just terrible, terrible details. She will just kind of write the story and get it done, instead of, I guess, beating a dead horse would be the idiom for it. But in this story, I think she could have beat the horse a little longer, because I would have loved more information on some of the characters. Back to the painting. I did not know how big ravens were until I saw them next to people. You always see them out and about, and I have seen like one in Yellowstone, but it was kind of at a distance. And so even though it seemed large, I did not realize how large they were until I looked at these reference photos, which then was kind of comical to think about the story and this white raven that is just like screaming and coming for people and just acting crazy. And then she's like, oh, here comes trouble. Like, that is just comical to me. The Revenant, I, again, was too lazy to go look up the exact description that she had of the Revenants, which were really cool. I mean, just the coolest. And this one, I'm pretty sure, had something along the lines of like, it had holy fire, but I think it had a crown and some other things. And I wasn't really sure how to create that in my painting and really get that across, because you don't see the Revenant. The Revenant just becomes a power that you just see in the story. Like, it comes through her. So like when you see the demon fire or the ghost flame or whatever it's called, it's surrounding her. So the Revenant is not something that you can see because it is contained within her. But I still wanted to give it some sort of visage. I loved the idea of it almost being like a smoky figure that kind of like would bloom out of like her stringy hair, because one of the things is like she has just like this stringy black hair, and at first I almost wanted it to be a skull with like hair coming out of the eye sockets, but eventually it just looked better with it almost fusing with the hair, like almost seeming like a shadow, but not quite coming out of like the back of her head. I just really like this book, and I think everyone should go read it. Trying to think, like, reasons to read this book. Trash can goblin heroine. Great well, I say great. I am not a burn victim, so I'm not sure what great representation would be, but it had representation of a disabled character, and it did not hold them back. And some of the things that happened with the character felt realistic, but did not hold her back as a character or a human. So the burns on her hand would make it difficult for her to feel textures because her hand didn't have a lot of feeling in it. It also made it kind of difficult for her to grab and use weapons, such as like a knife, because she just didn't have fine motor skill in one of her hands. She did have trauma related to her burns, and it did trigger her at times in what I felt like was a pretty realistic way, in that she didn't really realize why she was having like anxiety about something. There was a lot of realistic things about like just the actual story in general. Usually, heroines, they get captured and then they magically break their way out, even though they are so weak and so fragile. But this was way more realistic it was like, instead of it being her breaking out herself, it would be her, picking a lock instead of brute force, or her using the Revenant's power to find a weakness in something. Instead of being just super cool and, alpha, she just used her brain. There's a character in the story that you don't expect to be a main player in the story, or rather, I didn't expect it. And that character kind of speaks the mind of, I think, readers, by saying, like, no one thinks I'm smart, or people always expect me to be the stupid one. And they end up being really clever and helpful in a way that, like, Vespertine herself cannot, because she is in the public eye. She's someone that people are watching, but this other person who no one suspects anything of is able to do so much because she is underestimated. And I guess that's another thing. There's a lot of really good, like, female representation. You got Trash Goblin main character, beautiful girl sidekick, who's also capable, big, burly, like, alcohol drinking, keg down and priestess lady, super soft feminine Barbie girl priestess, and then the men are that way as well, like big burly man, nice, kind, gentle, like delicate man, totally misunderstood trash can man, totally misunderstood not trash can man. I mean, it has someone for everyone. And I think that was what I appreciated the most, is that, I mean, these were pretty good. You were able to see yourself in, like, everyone. And there were old people in the story, which I know is like, who cares? But often when you read fantasy, you don't see a lot of kids. You don't see a lot of older people, or you only see the age group that your main character is in. And I mean, we had everything. And I just really, I appreciated that. And I actually think this was one of her earlier books. I think it actually came out before a couple of the other ones that I really enjoyed from her. So if you haven't read this book, please do so. If you enjoyed watching me paint this idea that I had of Vespertine, please leave a comment. Hopefully I'll be able to post some more photos and videos soon. But until then, I hope you enjoyed. The link to the review will be in the description and in the card. Thanks.